we're going to take a closer look at advertising. Most organizations use some form of advertising, and if you're selling consumer goods to a mass market, advertising will probably be an important part of your marketing effort. When most people hear the word marketing, advertising is what they think of. One type of advertising is called institutional advertising. With institutional advertising, you're not actually advertising a product, you're simply trying to improve the image of a company. It may be part of a public relations effort, for example. There are several different forms of competitive advertising. One type of advertising is called comparative advertising. With comparative advertising, you actually compare your product to another company's products and you name names. You've got to be careful when you engage in comparative advertising because you might be inviting a lawsuit if you're not completely truthful and honest about what you're saying. Reminder advertising is advertising that basically reminds customers that an established brand is still available. So if you ever wonder why Band-Aid ever advertises, because they're so well known, they're simply reminding people that they exist. Reinforcement advertising assures current users that they've made the right choice. So, do you remember when we were talking about consumer behavior and we talked about cognitive dissonance, this idea of buyer's remorse? So, reinforcement advertising can reinforce the idea that you made a good decision. When companies are planning their advertising, they don't just think about individual advertising messages. They normally think about a campaign. So a campaign is a series of advertising messages over a period of many months that all have something in common. They all may have, for example, a common goal and a common objective. So there are a lot of ways to think about advertising campaigns. Our book talks about 8 basic steps in developing a campaign. Now, the number of steps that you use and the order in which you use them might vary from one company to the next, but I think this particular approach our text uses makes pretty good sense. Step 1 is to identify and analyze the target audience. Identifying the customer is usually a pretty good first step in answering many marketing questions. So here we're wanting to actually understand who we are trying to communicate with. Now, where are they located? What are their demographic characteristics? And what attitudes do they have right now about our product and our company? The second step is to define the advertising objectives. Just exactly what are you trying to accomplish? They should be stated clearly, precisely, and in measurable terms. Sometimes companies try to state advertising objectives in terms of sales. I don't necessarily think that's always a good idea, because a lot of things can affect sales other than advertising. Just because you have a certain level of sales doesn't mean your advertising is good, and just because your sales fall below a certain level doesn't mean your advertising is at fault. A communications objective looks at the question, what exactly can advertising accomplish? And advertising can communicate. And so communication objectives might be stated in terms of awareness or attitudes or something like that. Let's say, for example, you wanted to use awareness as an advertising objective. In other words, you're trying to get people to become more aware of your brand. So in order to use this type of objective, you've got to have a benchmark. In other words, you need to do some marketing research to find out what your current level of brand awareness is. Then you can set an objective to have a higher level of brand awareness and use that as the goal for your campaign. Next is creating the advertising platform. So the advertising platform, kind of like a political platform, is just a statement about your basic issues or selling points that you want to advertise, that you want to emphasize in your advertising. They should consist of things that are important to the consumers, and so research and customer surveys can help you determine some of these things. The platform can give guidance to the creative staff when they're actually putting the advertising messages together. Next, you determine the advertising appropriation, or how much money are you going to spend. Now, this is a problem because there's no one best method of doing this. This depends on things like geographically, how large is your market, what kind of product you've got, what your sales volume is. So there are 4 basic methods of trying to understand how much to spend. The first method is called the objective and task approach. Now, this makes a lot of sense just from a common sense point of view. Step 1, you ask yourself, what is my objective? And then step 2, you ask yourself, well, what advertising task do I need to perform in order to accomplish my objective? The problem with implementing this is that there's no defined way to know exactly what you've got to do. So if you want to increase your brand awareness from 10% to 15% over a 6-month period, there's no particular advertising task that you know that you've got to perform. But at least this does ask the question, what is the objective? A second approach is the percentage of sales approach. Now this is easy to use, but it's arbitrary. There is no one correct percentage. And so one company might decide that 20% of their sales is an appropriate number. Another company might decide that 5% of sales is an appropriate number. There's really no one percentage that's right. Competition matching simply means you look at your competition. And if your competition is spending a lot of money, then you feel like maybe you need to get really aggressive. If your competition is not spending very much, then you might feel like, well, I can cut back on what I'm doing. With the arbitrary approach, you probably have a sales forecast, you've got some concept of what your expenses are going to be, and you've got a concept about what you want your return on sales to be. And into that, you fit some amount for an advertising budget. Next comes the media plan. Basically, this describes the media you're going to be using. A couple of things you might want to keep in mind. One is reach, the percentage of consumers in the target audience exposed to a message in a stated period of time. And then frequency, the number of times a typical targeted consumer is exposed to the message, usually per week. So reach and frequency are a couple of components of the media plan. So at this point, we have defined our objectives and we've determined our advertising budget. Now we have to decide how we're going to spend that money and effectively reach the target we're trying to reach. Now, this is a really hard thing to do, because what you want to do is you want to have a media plan that will reach everybody in your target and not leave anybody out. And also, you don't want any waste coverage, so you don't want to reach anybody that's not in your target. Well, the problem is, any television program you pick, any internet site you pick, any magazine you pick, will reach some of the people in your target market probably, but it'll also reach people outside the target market. Cost comparison indicators would be something like the cost to reach 1,000 people. And what that lets you do is that lets you compare a medium that reaches a lot of people to a medium that doesn't reach as many people, and you use the same basis, such as the cost per 1,000. So there are 3 basic types of schedules. One, just to run ads on a consistent level. So that's a continuous schedule. Flighting means you run ads periodically, alternating with periods when no ads are run. So you might run for 2 weeks, then off for 3 weeks, then on for 2 weeks again, then off for 3 weeks. Pulsing combines continuous and flighting. So you might have a moderate continuous schedule, and then periodically you'll have a heavier schedule inside that. The next step is to actually create the advertising message. So this is where the creative staff gets involved with this. So looking at the advertising platform for guidance, they actually decide things like, what features and benefits we're going to stress, what media are you going to use, because that might influence your creative work. Here you're going to select the media that you want to use. My view of media is this. There are a lot of media alternatives that exist. And if a medium is able to survive in a free market situation, they're doing some good for somebody. And so I think it would be a mistake to say that you would never use a particular medium or that you would always use another medium. Pick the combination of media that's best for you to reach your target for your company. The next step is executing the campaign. This might take a lot of time. It may take a lot of work. You've got to contact the media. You've got to get your advertising production done. You've got to schedule the media. You've got to get the advertising material distributed to the media. They execute the campaign. So this is a time-consuming, labor-intensive part of advertising that's necessary to make sure that the campaign is being executed the way you want it to. There are a couple of ways of looking at evaluating advertising effectiveness. One is to use pretests. So a pretest is trying to evaluate the impact of advertising before you actually spend the media money. This is an attempt to find out if the message gets the job done. Then there's post-testing. This is testing the effectiveness after you've run the campaign. either probably using some kind of a memory test like recognition, finding how many people remember seeing an ad, how many people can recall seeing the ad. So if you've established objectives, communication objectives, at the beginning of the campaign, then the evaluation process is to basically ask the question, did we accomplish the objectives? So if your objective was to increase brand awareness from 10% to 15%, the evaluation asks the question, well, did we accomplish that? Here's the question to think about. This is an ad for club crackers that would appear in a magazine. So the question is this: how does attaching a coupon to this ad for club crackers help marketers evaluate the success of the ad? Well, this is one of those rare situations where we're blending sales promotion through the coupon with advertising. And in order to redeem the coupon, the consumers have to give the coupon to a retailer. The retailer then eventually gives that coupon back to the sponsor because the sponsor is going to reimburse the retailer's expenses. In this example, the use of sales promotion blended with advertising does provide feedback and does give the sponsor a chance to pretty accurately evaluate the effectiveness of the advertising. That's a closer look at advertising.